It's not hard to find a Toyota Supra enthusiast that thinks that the GR Supra is an abomination for its very existence, not to mention the fact that you can get a model with a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine under the hood. But depending on exactly what you're looking for in your next performance vehicle, this could be an excellent option, and I have to say, if I were shopping for a Supra, I might just get the 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. Obviously, the 2-liter model is going to be less expensive. This starts just around $42,000 or so not too far off what we see a 4-cylinder turbocharged Mustang, or of course some of the mid-level to base versions of the Chevy Camaro. But you're getting a very different vehicle. You're getting a 2-door, 2-seat roadster. Which Supra is right for you, and is this even a Supra at all? Let's talk about that in this video. If you're of the opinion that this Supra is simply a BMW with a Toyota logo on it and some bright yellow paint, nothing I can do is going to change your mind. But the real answer is more complicated for those that are interested in the history. You see, if it wasn't for Toyota's money, neither this nor the BMW Z4 would ever have existed, because BMW has said they were going to cancel it until Toyota came along with their cash. The reason is that developing a modern 21st century car platform is incredibly expensive. And even though there are some components in this vehicle that are shared with other BMW vehicles, namely the engine and transmission, the development of this and the Z4 cost an awful lot of money. And it's something that BMW didn't even think they could make a business case themselves for. So along came Toyota, they wanted to build a new Supra, and they said, hey, let's work together and let's create a platform suitable for both vehicles. Toyota will tune it, and to save money and make sure that the Supra is as affordable as it is, we'll build it in the BMW factory and we'll use as many BMW parts as we possibly can. The reality is that if you wanted a Supra built by Toyota that was 100% Toyota, you probably would have ended up with a shrunken Lexus, and you wouldn't have the same level of performance, same level of refinement, or the same kind of price tag that we find in this Supra, because developing a vehicle entirely by Toyota in Toyota's development studios would have cost an awful lot more money than what we have here. So the result to you is a more affordable performance car. We see the exact same thing going on with the Mazda MX-5 and the Fiat 124 Spider, also known as the Fiata. If it wasn't for Fiat's money, that generation of Miata probably would have had a very short lifetime. And of course, both Toyota and Subaru have said that if it wasn't for the two of them working together, the new 86 and BRZ wouldn't happen either. This is a trend that we're not just going to be seeing with vehicles like the Supra or the 86 or the Mazda Miata, but also with more mainstream EVs. General Motors and Honda have recently inked a deal where General Motors will be building Honda and Acura electric vehicles in their factory, and you can expect additional tie-ups between Toyota and perhaps Mazda, Toyota and perhaps Subaru in the future. Bottom line, even though the Supra certainly has an awful lot of German DNA going on under the skin, this was designed from the very beginning to be a Supra. The two companies sat down and they decided that Toyota would be tasked with designing a vehicle to compete with hardtop inexpensive Porsches, and that BMW would target the roadster market. And that's why we have this, and we have the topless Z4. At just under $43,000, this is obviously more expensive than a Mazda MX-5, but this is still one of the more affordable 2-door, 2-seat vehicles you can buy in the United States at the moment. This is considerably shorter than, I guess, what you could call the competition. At 172.5 inches long, this is 2 feet shorter than the Dodge Challenger, about 16 inches shorter than the Camaro or the Mustang. Quite logically, you can't talk about performance 2-door vehicles in America without talking about the Camaro and the Mustang. Those are both about 16 inches longer than this because they have a back seat. They're coupes, but they're not 2-seat coupes, so there's definitely going to be a difference. Not just in terms of interior practicality, but also in terms of driving position. You'll notice that the driver's head is going to be right around here, and then the rear tire is right around here. So you'd have a very different feel in a 2-door, 2-seat vehicle like this, where you're sitting practically on top of the rear axle. Moving around to the rear, we find LED taillights and what looks like a vent, but this is actually not functional right there. A very large ducktail trunk lid and then dual exhaust at the bottom. Toyota has been very aggressive at bringing their latest active driver assistance technologies and active safety technologies down to every trim of every model in their lineup. And the Supra couldn't really be any different, so what Toyota decided to do was just grab BMW's active safety technologies that corresponded to what we see in the Toyota lineup and then make them standard on the Supra. If you're disappointed, don't be, because they operate basically the same, and there is a little bit of an advantage because I think BMW's adaptive cruise control software is a little bit more refined than what we see in the latest Toyota models. Why did Toyota do that? Well, quite simply, they didn't have anything that was designed for this platform, and it was a little bit easier to adapt to what BMW had already done, and because we have BMW wiring harnesses and electronic systems, it was just easier. Nestled under the hood, but most importantly, entirely behind the front axle, is a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. Under here, this one supposedly produces 255 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. I say supposedly because BMW has long been known for underrating their engines, and this is no exception. With a 0 to 60 time of 4.5 seconds, I suspect this is producing closer to 275, 280 horsepower, somewhere around there, and probably more than 300 pound-feet of torque, although Toyota and BMW won't say. The engine is mated to a standard 8-speed automatic transmission and, of course, rear-wheel drive. If you want more power, there is, of course, the inline-6 turbo available that will get you 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds, but there is going to be a dynamic difference between the two vehicles. That 3-liter engine is not only longer, but it also carries more of its weight in the front of the vehicle. Because this engine is entirely behind the front axle, that 3-liter inline-6 sort of straddles the axle, and a number of the cylinders and the accessories are in front of the front axle, changing the vehicle's weight balance. That's one of the reasons that I like the 2-liter turbo version of the Supra. That 3-liter engine is also going to be heavier, and it means that the entire front end of the vehicle is going to be heavier. The front seats are definitely an upgrade over what we see in the Toyota 86. This model has a partial manual and partial power seat, but we still have the same range of motion you'd expect out of a luxury car's power seat. So I can move the seat forward and backward, I can pull this handle and change the tilt of the seat bottom cushion, I can pull this handle and change the height of the seat bottom cushion, there's a recline lever over here, and then I have a power inflator for the side bolsters and 4-way adjustable lumbar support. The steering wheel is a manual tilt telescopic model with a decent range of motion, and the passenger seat has the exact same range of motion as the driver's seat, including the lumbar and the inflatable bolsters. Even though on the outside this is considerably smaller than something like the Camaro, we actually have a little bit more trunk space, 10.2 cubic feet. That's because the Camaro is really not packaged terribly efficiently, although you will find more cargo room and a more practical trunk shape in something like the Ford Mustang. This is, however, larger than the Toyota 86. You'll have no problem fitting roller luggage like this 22-inch roller bag right here, but it will be a squeeze to put two 24-inch roller bags back here. I did finally make it work, but it took an awful lot of fiddling. That mainly has to do with the sort of hourglass shape of this cargo area opening. The cargo area itself extends a little bit further than the opening, but getting bags in here can be pretty tricky. You probably could put things like a pencil stroller in here or perhaps some shorter golf clubs, but some of the longer ones could be a bit tricky. Overall, I'm going to give the Trunk Comfort Index 4 out of 10 points because this is a little bit larger than I had expected, but not quite as large as I might have liked. Now let's go for a spin around the interior. We don't find a moonroof in this model, just a pretty standard fabric ceiling right there. The driver and front passenger have fixed height shoulder belts and fixed height headrests. They're integrated into the seat back. And you'll notice looking right there next to that passenger seat, this is where we see the shelf that covers the cargo area in the back. There's a little strut right there, and then there's the shelf behind. That means that if we go in for a closer look under there, you can actually see the subwoofers and part of the cargo area. That's actually the mat in the cargo area that is not separated from the cabin, and that does make it a little bit louder in here than if this did have a complete separation between that area. On the other hand, if you did for some reason want to put longer items like skis in here, you actually would be able to do that because we have that lift back right back there, and you could open the lift back, stuff them in, and have the skis right up to your dashboard. The seat back and bottom cushion have inserts made of a faux suede material. You can see that we have those contrasting red dots there in the middle. That matches the stitching going on the bolsters of the seat back and seat bottom cushion. Again, the side bolsters on the seat back cushion are adjustable. There's a button on the seat. As we move on over to the front doors, you'll start noticing the combination of Toyota and BMW DNA. We have BMW door handles and switches there, but we have a JBL audio system rather than a Harman Kardon audio system like you typically find in a BMW. Moving over to the dashboard, the design definitely is reminiscent of Toyota and Lexus models with the way this entire dashboard is put together. But then when we move on over to this infotainment screen, you'll notice that this is BMW's iDrive. This is not the absolute latest version of iDrive, but it does support wireless CarPlay integration. You might be wondering why Toyota didn't grab a system out of a modern Lexus. Well, they would have had to have rewrote the software to interface with the vehicle, and honestly, this system is a little bit better than what we see in most modern Lexuses. Below that, we have two large air vents, controls for that infotainment system, very BMW-like there, as are the climate controls right there, dual zone automatic climate control. It's a storage area for your smartphone. We have the iDrive controller. This is a touchscreen version of iDrive, so you can use the controller or you can just touch the screen. We have the same sort of joystick shifter we have in a lot of BMWs. Drive is back there, manual mode is over to the left, and park is the button up top. We then have the drive mode selector button here, button for the parking sensors, stability and traction control, safety system enable disable button, and an electric parking brake. We have a fixed center armrest right here. It is leather wrapped, and then we have 2 cup holders. On the driver's side, we have an instrument cluster with a bunch of different elements. We have LED gauges for the fuel level and the engine temperature. Then we have a large color LCD in the middle, and then a physical ring that has the numbers on it positioned right over the LCD. So the speedometer over here, this digital speedometer, is part of basically the same LCD as you can see the park and the needle right there for the tachometer. The design changes a little bit based on whether we're in the sport mode or not sport mode, and then you can cycle through a few different options over on the right side of the screen. As we see in some of BMW's other displays, the bulk of this large blank section over here on this side is used primarily for the infotainment screen. So as you can see, I can cycle through things right there through tracks, and it pops up and then goes away. If factory navigation is active, then a smaller portion of the display would give you turn-by-turn directions. Steering wheel is perhaps the most obviously BMW component about this interior. We have sport grips up top. It's a 3-spoke wheel with a pretty thick bottom spoke there. A large Toyota logo right here on this very large round section. Paddle shifters on the back, up on the right, down on the left. We have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system over here on this side of the steering wheel, and the controls for the infotainment system over here on the right side. I've got to say, actually, versus Toyota's mainstream vehicles, these controls are perhaps a little bit less intuitive. I find the controls for the Toyota Radar Adaptive Cruise Control System in things like the Highlander a little bit easier to use than these, and definitely the infotainment system as well. This dial right here is ostensibly tracked forward and backwards, so it would let you scroll through your playlist if you're on a device that supports it, but personally, I would rather just have a track forward-backward toggle. Over the week that I've had this Supra, it has been absolutely pouring with rain, but fortunately, the sun came out today, and today is a perfect day to be driving this 2.0 Supra. 0 to 60 is definitely quicker than some folks might think. 4.5 seconds in my testing in this model. Obviously, that is slower than the 3-liter model, which did it well under 4 seconds, but that's still a very acceptable 0 to 60 time, and highly competitive if you're going to be comparing this to something like the Mustang or the Camaro. Now, details are still a little scarce on exactly what Nissan's next Z will be like in terms of performance, but you should probably expect something along the lines of the Q60 from the Infiniti line, because it is going to be very closely related to that Infiniti Q60. The less expensive Supra doesn't get the upgraded brakes that we find in the 3-liter model, so 60 to 0 stopping distances are going to be a little bit longer, even though this is lighter. I tested 110 feet in this model versus 97 feet in the 3-liter Supra. The Supra has absolutely incredible stopping distances, whether we're talking about this model or the 3-liter model. 110 feet is an absolutely excellent distance, but it will get even shorter if you get that 3-liter model. That's because the brakes are upgraded. We have larger brakes, larger rotors, and we also have a 4-piston arrangement rather than the single piston arrangement that we have on this model. Now let's get back to the handling and the feel, because that's what the Supra is all about. You can definitely tell that Toyota has tuned the suspension in the Supra, so this does not feel exactly like the BMW Z4. Toyota has a long history of creating excellent driving rear-wheel drive vehicles. And I'm not just talking about the previous generation Supra, I'm talking about all of the rear-wheel drive Lexuses. They definitely have a very particular feel to the steering and the suspension tune, and just the way everything about the vehicle comes together. And this reminds me an awful lot more of the Lexus IS in terms of the way the steering feels than something like the BMW 3 Series. In addition to all of that, this has a different feel out on the road simply due to the design of the vehicle. I'm sitting practically on the rear axle, so it feels like there is this enormously long hood in front of me, and that the entire vehicle is just sort of spinning around the axis, as if I was on the axis and everything was spinning around me. It's a very unique feeling that you really only get in really small 2-seat vehicles like this. And then there's the weight balance. The 3-liter Supra is almost perfectly balanced, but the 2-liter model actually has a little bit more weight in the rear than it does in the front. And that definitely makes the steering feel a little bit lighter, makes this turn-in feel a little bit easier. Even though you can get higher levels of grip from the factory in the 3-liter Supra, I prefer the way the 2-liter Supra is balanced. And that's why I'm absolutely going to give handling an A. Out on a rougher road like the gravel road that I'm on here, you'll definitely notice that this does not have the adaptive variable suspension system that we find in the 3-liter Supra. Now, that does help reduce weight, so it's one of the reasons that the 2-liter Supra is lighter than the 3-liter model, aside from just the engine. If you're looking for a less expensive suspension system to maintain, to own, to keep around for a longer time, you might want to take a look at this particular model, because it's likely going to be a little bit less expensive in the long run, since this is a regular standard suspension system. Now, this does not get as firm as the 3-liter suspension system when it's in its firmest mode, and personally I think that's okay. I think that Toyota has struck a pretty good balance with this suspension. The suspension system is definitely firmer, and the body roll and tip and dive are certainly more controlled than we find in a Camaro or a Mustang or a Mazda MX-5, but this is still suitable for daily commuting. If you're interested in something that has a sportier vibe, a firmer vibe to it, this shouldn't really be a problem. In my cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, I got 72 decibels in here. Interestingly enough, this was exactly the same as the last 3-liter model that I tested. Comparisons are a little bit tricky because you could compare this to pretty much anything from a Mazda MX-5 all the way on up to a Mercedes-Benz 2-door vehicle. I'm going to go ahead and give the cabin noise a B, because you will find some slightly quieter options out there, but generally speaking, most sporty vehicles like this are going to have a bit more cabin noise. Now, at higher speeds, say 70 or 75 miles an hour, then there is a reasonable amount of tire noise coming from the back, because that cargo area is completely open. You can see it right there over my shoulder. And you will certainly notice that out on rougher highway pavement, where you definitely get more of that road rumble into the cabin. In terms of fuel economy, I've been averaging an impressive 28 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, so I'm certainly going to give this an A when it comes to fuel economy. This definitely gets better fuel economy than something like the Ford EcoSport with the 2.3-liter engine, or of course the turbocharged Camaro. Call the Supra whatever you want. Call it German, call it Japanese, call it a BMW, call it a Toyota. This is an awful lot of fun. The combination of the German DNA, the Japanese tuning, the BMW engine, and the Toyota price tag really make the Supra very, very interesting, even in this 2-liter version that is often lampooned by enthusiasts as not being a real Supra. Well, performance-wise, this is an awful lot of fun. Get this out on a track, and I swear, even some of those enthusiasts might change their mind. At the moment, the 2-liter Supra could either be a great bargain or a little bit expensive, depending on exactly what you want to compare this to. It's going to start at $42,900. If you want the 3-liter engine, that will bump things up to $50,990. Obviously, the Supra is significantly more expensive than a base Camaro or Mustang, but it's also significantly less expensive than a Porsche Cayman at $59,900. And the Porsche was one of the design targets for the Z4 and Supra when BMW and Toyota were working on the vehicles together. It was decided within the envelope that BMW would target the ragtop version and Toyota would be left to compete with the hardtop Cayman. When you think of the Supra that way, the Supra makes an awful lot of sense, because the interior is certainly more premium than the Mustang and Camaro. The exterior definitely has a more premium vibe to it as well. And of course, this is a 2-door 2-seat roadster, not a 2-door 4-seat coupe. The Supra definitely feels more nimble than the Mustang and Camaro. The Mustang and Camaro feel great, don't get me wrong, but they don't have that nimbleness, that lightness, and of course that roadstery feel where you're practically sitting on the rear axle that you see in the Supra. The Supra on a tight winding mountain road kind of makes me feel like I'm sitting in a swivel seat right like this one, because when you're turning the vehicle, it's practically like you're rotating, the vehicle's rotating on an axis around you, and that's a little bit different than we see in vehicles with longer wheelbases where you're sitting more in the middle of the vehicle, like in the Mustang and Camaro. Now, the next generation Nissan Z car is going to be obviously a direct competitor, because that is a 2-door 2-seat roadster. Currently, the Z is less expensive at $30,090, but honestly, the current generation Z is getting really, really old. We don't know what the next generation Z has in store exactly, but there have been a lot of spy shots and a lot of rumors, and it seems like it's going to be getting the twin-turbo 6-cylinder engine lineup from the Infiniti vehicles, namely the Infiniti Q60. Most likely, it's also going to be riding on a version of the Infiniti Q60's body. Again, details are very sketchy, but expect it to be basically a shrunken Infiniti Q60. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but we don't know whether it's going to have the lightness and the nimbleness that we find in the current generation Toyota Supra. Of course, there's also the BMW Z4, the very close relative of the Supra, at $49,700. In my opinion, the Z4 is probably the best and most direct competitor to the Supra. It justifies its price tag, honestly, a little bit better. It has a premium brand name on it. It has the BMW logo on the front. It also has some of the more recent BMW systems. I was surprised that when the Supra launched that Toyota did not get the absolute latest generation of BMW's iDrive system. That could simply have been cost, their desire to have a different size screen in the dashboard, etc. But you will find the more modern gadgets and gizmos in the BMW Z4 versus the Supra. And then of course there's the logo on the front, which is really hard to deny. It's going to have a BMW logo versus the Toyota logo on the front of the Supra. Now, does that mean that the Supra isn't really a Toyota? This is really a weird argument, of course, but kind of sort of is and kind of sort of isn't. Because again, without Toyota's money, the Supra wouldn't exist, and neither would the BMW Z4. Whatever you want to call the Supra, I'm really glad that it exists because it is nimble, it's fun, it's more affordable, and it has the dealer network behind it. That's one of the reasons that you might want to get the Toyota Supra over the BMW Z4 is that there are more Toyota dealers around the United States, and getting service and parts is going to be a little bit easier because of that Toyota dealer network. And then of course there's the fact that it is significantly less expensive than the BMW. If you get carried away with options, that Z4 will get an awful lot more expensive than that base price would indicate, and you're getting basically the same vehicle, just without the top. Be sure and let me know what you would get if your money were on the line. I suspect I might wait until the new Nissan Z car comes out to make up my mind on this particular one, because I do love that twin-turbo V6 that we find in the Infiniti product line, and it could be just a little bit different. I love the way the Z Proto looks. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and find me over at facebook.com/alexautos. You can check out the merch store at aoamerch.com, and I'll see all of you next week.